Sometimes the smallest accident opens the biggest door in your life, but only if your heart is strong enough to walk through it. Ethan Walker had spent the last 8 years learning that life rarely offered second chances. At 39, he wasn't chasing promotions or expensive dreams anymore. Every sunrise meant packing his 12-year-old daughter Lily's lunch, making sure her homework was tucked neatly in her backpack, and driving 22 miles through the quiet suburbs before reporting to the Grand Crest Hotel, where he worked as a maintenance technician. Guests rarely noticed him. Executives walked past him without lifting their eyes. That suited Ethan just fine. Quiet work paid honest bills, and honest bills kept the lights on in the little 2-bedroom house where memories of his late wife still lived in every corner. On a bright Monday morning, the hotel buzzed with unusual excitement. Luxury SUVs lined the circular entrance. Security teams whispered into earpieces. Staff members straightened uniforms that already looked perfect. America's youngest billionaire CEO, Victoria Hayes, had arrived for a confidential board meeting involving a multi-billion-dollar merger. Few employees had ever seen her in person, but everyone knew the stories. Brilliant, demanding, impossible to impress. Ethan barely paid attention. Air conditioners still broke whether billionaires were visiting or not. Around 10:15, his radio crackled with an urgent request. A guest in the exclusive executive wing had reported water dripping from the ceiling. Grab the master maintenance key card and head to Suite 1807 immediately, dispatch instructed. Ethan acknowledged the call, collected the key card from the service office, and hurried upstairs carrying only his toolbox and years of quiet professionalism. The hallway was silent except for the soft hum of climate control and the distant chime of an elevator. He checked the room number again, took a steady breath, knocked twice, and waited. No answer. Assuming the guest had stepped out after reporting the issue, he carefully unlocked the door and announced himself. Hotel maintenance. The room beyond was peaceful, sunlight, spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows across polished hardwood floors. Ethan took one cautious step inside before stopping instantly. Victoria Hayes was standing several yards away behind a decorative dressing screen, changing into a business jacket after preparing for her meeting. She was fully covered by appropriate clothing, except for the natural moment of changing outfits in the privacy of her suite. And the instant she realized someone had entered, surprise crossed both their faces. Ethan's eyes dropped immediately toward the floor. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," he said quietly, already stepping backward. "I was sent to repair a leak. I must have the wrong room." Before another word could be spoken, 2 security officers rushed through the still-open doorway, alerted by the electronic entry log. One moved between Ethan and Victoria, while another firmly instructed Ethan to remain where he was until the situation could be understood. Housekeeping staff gathering in the hallway exchanged uneasy glances. Whispered assumptions spread faster than facts. Ethan stood silently with his toolbox resting beside his worn work boots, knowing that sometimes innocence sounds weakest in the first few moments of misunderstanding. And somewhere behind the security team, Victoria Hayes looked into his eyes for only a second, long enough to notice something that didn't belong in the face of a man accused of crossing a line. She saw no arrogance, no curiosity, no excuse. Only embarrassment, quiet dignity, and the unmistakable fear of someone who realized a single accidental step might cost him everything he had left. Ethan remained exactly where he was until the security supervisor finished reviewing his identification badge and maintenance assignment. Every second felt longer than the last. The hallway had filled with managers, concierge staff, and curious employees pretending to be busy while quietly watching the scene unfold. No one raised their voice, yet the silence carried a heavier judgment than any accusation could have. The chief of hotel security finally spoke in a measured tone. "Mr. Walker, please come with us while we verify what happened." Ethan nodded without protest, picked up his toolbox, and followed them downstairs. He did not argue. He did not interrupt. He simply walked with the calm discipline of a man who had learned years ago that dignity often speaks loudest when words fail. Inside a private conference room, The director of operations folded his hands across the polished table. Ethan, Victoria Hayes has not filed a personal complaint, but this incident involves one of the most important guests this hotel has ever hosted. Until we complete our review, we are placing you on administrative leave. Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before answering quietly. I understand. The director seemed almost surprised by the response. Is there anything you would like to add? Ethan thought about explaining the dispatch call, the master key card, the unanswered knock, and a simple mistake that had changed his morning forever. Instead, he chose honesty over desperation. Only that I entered believing I was responding to a maintenance request. I would never intentionally invade someone's privacy. The room became still. His words carried no anger, only quiet certainty. Human Resources collected his badge and asked him to return his uniform by the end of the week if the investigation required permanent separation from employment. Ethan thanked them for the opportunity they had given him over the past 6 years before leaving the hotel through the employee entrance. Outside, the afternoon sun felt strangely cold. He climbed into his aging pickup truck but did not start the engine right away. His phone buzzed. It was a reminder that Lily's parent-teacher conference would begin in less than 2 hours. He forced a small smile despite everything. Whatever happened to him, he would not let his daughter see fear before hope. Across town, Lily waved excitedly as she climbed into the passenger seat after school. How was work today, Dad? She asked. Ethan looked at her bright blue eyes in the rearview mirror for a heartbeat before answering. It was different than I expected. She laughed softly. That usually means something interesting happened. Ethan smiled, but only for a moment. Maybe someday I will tell you about it. That evening, while Lily finished her math homework at the kitchen table, Ethan quietly calculated the family savings. Mortgage payment, electricity, groceries, gasoline. Without his paycheck, they could make it for perhaps 6 weeks if every dollar was stretched with care. He closed a notebook before Lily noticed. Upstairs in the presidential suite, Victoria Hayes stood alone beside the wide window overlooking the city skyline. Her executive assistant reviewed merger documents, but Victoria was not listening. She kept replaying the brief encounter in her mind. She had expected panic, excuses, or nervous apologies from a man caught in an embarrassing mistake. Instead, she remembered how quickly he had turned away, how carefully he had lowered his eyes, and how his first concern had been protecting her comfort rather than defending himself. It did not feel like the behavior of a man hiding bad intentions. It felt like the quiet reflex of someone whose character had been built long before that hotel door had ever opened. The following morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds and steady rain that painted long silver lines across the kitchen window. Ethan woke before dawn as he always did, even though there was nowhere he needed to report. Habit was difficult to silence. He brewed coffee, packed Lily's lunch, and smiled as she hurried downstairs with one shoe untied and a science project tucked under her arm. "You're still coming to pick me up after school, right?" she asked. Ethan nodded immediately. "I would not miss it for the world." She hugged him without another question, trusting him with the simple faith only children possess. After dropping her off, Ethan drove aimlessly for nearly an hour before stopping beside a quiet lake, where autumn leaves floated gently across the water. He stared at the surface, replaying every second inside, Suite 1807. Had he knocked loudly enough? Had he checked the room number twice? Somewhere in those ordinary moments, an ordinary morning had become the hardest day of his life. Across the city, Victoria Hayes sat at the head of a polished conference table surrounded by attorneys, financial advisors, and board members discussing numbers worth billions of dollars. Charts changed across giant screens. Voices debated projections. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to a maintenance technician whose calm apology refused to leave her memory. During a brief recess, she quietly called her chief of security. "I want to review the hallway footage from yesterday." There was a short pause before he answered. "Of course, Miss Hayes." 20 minutes later, the video appeared on a private monitor inside her executive suite. Victoria watched carefully. Ethan arrived carrying only his toolbox. He checked the work order on his tablet twice. He knocked. He waited. He announced himself exactly according to hotel policy. Only after receiving no response did he unlock the door. The moment he realized someone was inside, he immediately lowered his eyes and stepped backward toward the hallway. He never looked around the room. He never hesitated. He never attempted to explain himself until asked. Victoria replayed the recording again. Then a third time. Something bothered her. "Freeze the frame before he enters," she instructed. The technician enlarged the image. The room number displayed on Ethan's electronic work order was clearly Suite 1807. Victoria Froneth. Who created that assignment? Another employee searched the digital records. "That is strange," he whispered. The maintenance request actually came from Suite 1817. Somehow the assignment changed before it reached Mr. Walker's tablet. Victoria leaned back slowly. "Can that happen by accident?" The technician hesitated. "It is extremely unusual." Silence settled across the room. For the first time since the incident, Victoria felt something heavier than embarrassment. She felt responsibility. At nearly the same hour, Ethan stopped by the neighborhood grocery store with a carefully folded shopping list. He counted every dollar before placing fresh bread, milk, eggs, and Lily's favorite apples into the cart. At the checkout counter, the cashier recognized him from years of weekly visits. "Taking a few vacation days?" she asked with a friendly smile. Ethan returned the smile, although it carried quiet sadness. "Something like that." He loaded the groceries into his truck and drove away without saying another word. He had no idea that across the city, the woman whose opinion now carried the greatest influence over his future had just discovered the first small crack in a story everyone else believed was already finished. And sometimes truth does not arrive with loud applause. Sometimes it begins with one careful person willing to watch a few extra seconds that everyone else was too busy to notice. 3 days passed before the rain finally gave way to clear blue skies. Ethan had filled every hour with small repair jobs for neighbors, grateful for whatever honest work came his way. On Friday afternoon, after picking Lily up from school, he promised to stop for ice cream before heading home. She smiled all the way across town, talking excitedly about a history project and the possibility of joining the school choir. Ethan listened with quiet pride, realizing that even difficult seasons could not steal every beautiful moment. After dropping Lily at home with their elderly next-door neighbor while he picked up a replacement water pump for a customer, Ethan drove toward the old industrial district where the local auto parts store sat beside a quiet stretch of highway. At nearly the same time, Victoria Hayes left a private meeting without her usual convoy of luxury vehicles. After days filled with lawyers and board members, she wanted one peaceful drive alone. She borrowed a simple dark blue sedan from the company fleet, hoping for a few miles of ordinary life away from cameras and headlines. 20 minutes later, a warning light illuminated the dashboard. The engine began to lose power before the sedan rolled gently onto the shoulder of a two-lane road surrounded by tall maple trees dressed in early autumn colors. Victoria stepped outside, lifted the hood, and stared at an engine she understood only from executive reports rather than practical experience. She laughed softly at herself. "Billions of dollars," she whispered, "and I cannot solve one small mechanical problem." A pickup truck approached from the opposite direction before slowing almost instinctively. Ethan recognized a stranded driver before he recognized the woman standing beside the disabled car. He parked several yards behind the sedan, grabbed his toolbox, and walked forward with the same calm professionalism he had shown every day for years. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said gently. Victoria turned at the familiar voice. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. The memory of the hotel hung quietly between them, like a conversation waiting for courage. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "If you would rather wait for roadside assistance, I completely understand." Victoria studied him carefully. There was no bitterness in his voice, no resentment, no attempt to remind her of everything he had lost, only simple courtesy. She slowly stepped aside. "I would appreciate your help." Ethan nodded once and leaned over the engine compartment. Within moments, he noticed a loose battery terminal that had shifted after driving across several miles of rough pavement. Using a small wrench from his toolbox, he tightened the connection before asking Victoria to start the engine again. The sedan came to life immediately with a smooth, steady hum. Victoria let out a relieved breath. That was surprisingly simple. Ethan smiled faintly. Sometimes the biggest problems begin with the smallest things coming loose. The words lingered between them longer than either expected. Victoria reached into her purse. "Please let me pay you for your time." Ethan gently raised one hand. "No, thank you." It took less than 5 minutes, and everyone deserved a little kindness on a difficult day. Before she could respond, he closed his toolbox, wished her a safe drive, and quietly returned to his pickup. Victoria remained standing beside her car, watching him disappear down the highway. She realized something unexpected had just happened. The man whose life had been disrupted after one unfortunate misunderstanding had been given a perfect opportunity to make her feel uncomfortable or indebted. Instead, he had chosen grace. And for the first time since they met, Victoria Hayes found herself wondering not what kind of employee Ethan Walker had been, but what kind of man he truly was. Victoria Hayes had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions, rescued failing companies, and read people across polished boardroom tables with remarkable accuracy, yet she could not stop thinking about a man who had quietly refused both her money and her sympathy. By Monday morning, she asked her executive assistant to gather Ethan Walker's employment file, not because she wanted to judge him, but because she realized she had done exactly that only days before. The folder was surprisingly thin. 6 years at the Grand Crest Hotel. Perfect attendance, except for the week his wife had been hospitalized years earlier. Outstanding performance reviews. Multiple handwritten compliments from guests praising his honesty after returning expensive watches, jewelry, and forgotten wallets that no one would have known were missing. One note caught Victoria's attention. A retired couple from Montana had written, "Mr. Walker treated us with more kindness than some people treat their own family. Your hotel is fortunate to have him." Victoria read the sentence twice before quietly closing the folder. "There has to be more," she whispered. Instead of returning to financial reports, she instructed her assistant to arrange a discreet background review limited to publicly available information. She wanted facts, not gossip. The report arrived the following afternoon. Ethan had never appeared in court. He had no disciplinary record. After his wife passed away from a long illness 5 years earlier, he had declined several higher-paying jobs that required constant travel because he refused to leave Lily without a parent at home every evening. His weekends were often spent repairing bicycles for neighborhood children, helping elderly neighbors with broken fences, or volunteering at the local community center whenever time allowed. None of those acts had ever appeared on social media because Ethan never told anyone about them. Meanwhile, Ethan continued searching for stable work while accepting every small repair job he could find. On Wednesday morning, an elderly widow named Mrs. Eleanor Brooks called asking whether he could fix the loose railing on her front porch. After finishing the repair, she offered him $100, even though the work had taken less than 30 minutes. Ethan smiled warmly and accepted only $40. "That is all it was worth," he explained. Mrs. Brooks shook her head. "You could have charged more." Ethan gently tightened the final screw before placing the remaining cash back in her hand. Need and fairness are not always the same thing. Unknown to both of them, a black sedan had been parked quietly across the street for several minutes. Victoria had stopped only because she recognized Ethan's pickup truck while driving to another meeting. She watched through the windshield as the elderly woman tried again to press the extra money into his hands. Ethan politely refused a second time before carrying 2 heavy grocery bags into her kitchen without being asked. There were no cameras, no reporters, no executives waiting to applaud. Only one man choosing kindness because no one was supposed to be watching. Victoria remained motionless after Ethan drove away. She suddenly understood why the memory of his eyes had stayed with her since that morning at the hotel. Character like his could not be performed. It appeared only when applause was impossible and recognition would never come. As she drove back toward downtown, the city skyline reflected across her windshield like polished glass. Yet for the first time in years, the greatest lesson she had learned had nothing to do with business, wealth, or influence. It came from a father who possessed very little except quiet dignity, unwavering honesty, and a heart that refused to become bitter even after life had given him every reason to be. The following week began with an uneasy stillness that seemed to settle over Hayes' global holdings like a storm waiting beyond the horizon. Victoria arrived before sunrise, expecting another ordinary day of negotiations, but instead she found anxious executives gathered outside the boardroom, speaking in hushed voices. Overnight, an anonymous account had released a carefully edited security video that appeared to show a hotel employee deliberately entering her private suite. Headlines spread across financial websites within hours, questioning the company's security standards and suggesting that Victoria had received special treatment by quietly allowing the incident to disappear. Television commentators speculated without evidence. Online rumors multiplied faster than facts. Investors demanded explanations. Members of the board insisted the company respond immediately before the upcoming merger suffered irreversible damage. During an emergency meeting, one director leaned forward and spoke with unmistakable confidence. "We should publicly distance ourselves from the former employee. If we make it clear that he violated policy, this story ends today." Another executive nodded in agreement. The public needs someone to blame. Victoria remained silent. She watched the edited video play across the enormous conference room screen. Something about it felt wrong. The recording began only after Ethan had already stepped inside the suite. There was no footage showing him knocking. No footage showing him announcing himself. No footage showing him immediately lowering his eyes and backing toward the door. The beginning had simply vanished. "Where is the complete recording?" she finally asked. The chief legal officer hesitated. "This version is the one circulating online." Victoria looked directly at him. "That was not my question." The room became quiet. "Find the original file," she said calmly. "Every second of it." While attorneys and investigators searched through archived security records, Ethan knew nothing about the growing controversy. He spent the afternoon replacing damaged drywall in a small family-owned bookstore that had suffered a plumbing leak. The owner apologized for paying less than commercial rates, but Ethan smiled warmly. Honest work is always worth doing. As he finished cleaning the last bit of dust from the floor, he noticed the owner's young son struggling to repair the chain on an old bicycle outside the shop. Without saying a word, Ethan knelt beside the bicycle and spent another 20 minutes adjusting the gears until the wheels rolled smoothly again. The grateful father reached for his wallet. Ethan shook his head with a gentle smile. The drywall was the job. Helping him was simply the right thing to do. Late that afternoon, Victoria finally received the original security archive. Frame by frame, the investigation uncovered something no one had expected. The electronic maintenance request had been altered less than 2 minutes before it reached Ethan's device. Access logs showed the change came from an internal administrator account that should never have been used outside the information technology department. The mistake had not been random. Someone with authorized access had deliberately redirected Ethan to the wrong suite. Victoria slowly closed the report as a heavy silence filled her office. Ethan had never been the cause of the incident. He had been placed there. For reasons still unknown, an ordinary single father had unknowingly become the center of a carefully planned deception. As evening settled over the city and office lights reflected against the glass towers downtown, Victoria stood alone beside her window, realizing that the greatest threat facing her company was no longer a public scandal. It was the uncomfortable truth that an innocent man's quiet dignity had hidden a far more dangerous secret waiting to be uncovered. Ethan never imagined that a quiet Thursday evening would place him back on the edge of a story he believed was finally fading away. After finishing another small repair job, he stopped at a neighborhood diner where Lily loved the homemade chicken noodle soup. She chatted happily about choir practice while Ethan listened with the grateful smile of a father who measured wealth in ordinary moments instead of dollars. Across town, however, Victoria sat with a team of digital investigators reviewing every electronic record connected to the altered maintenance request. The deeper they searched, the more troubling the pattern became. Several access logs have been erased, yet one forgotten backup server still preserved fragments of the original activity. The altered work order had not been created by mistake. It had been routed through an administrator account belonging to a senior information technology manager who had quietly resigned 2 days after the hotel incident. Even more surprising, financial records revealed that the former employee had recently received a series of unusually large payments from an anonymous consulting firm connected to one of Hayes' Global Holdings' aggressive competitors. Victoria slowly placed the report on the table. Someone had not simply embarrassed her. Someone had tried to damage the public trust surrounding the upcoming merger by creating a scandal that appeared completely believable. The innocent maintenance technician had merely been the easiest person to sacrifice. Before she could decide her next move, another unexpected discovery appeared. During the forensic review, investigators recovered a deleted voice message automatically backed up by the hotel communication system. It was Ethan's original maintenance dispatch requesting confirmation because the room number seemed unusual. The recording ended before anyone answered, proving that he had questioned the assignment even before opening the suite door. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. The man had tried to prevent the mistake before it ever happened. At that very hour, Ethan returned home and found an envelope resting inside his mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single printed photograph showing the hallway outside Suite 1807 and a short typed message. Some doors are opened on purpose. There was no signature, no explanation. Ethan studied the note quietly before placing it back into the envelope. His first instinct was not fear. It was concern that someone might still be trying to hurt Victoria or her company. The next morning, instead of ignoring the strange message, Ethan drove to the Grand Crest Hotel and politely asked to speak with the head of security. He handed over the envelope without asking for anything in return. "I thought you should have this," he said calmly. "It may help explain what really happened." The security director looked genuinely surprised. "Mr. Walker, after everything you've been through, you still came back to help us?" Ethan answered with the same quiet honesty that had guided every difficult day of his life. "If someone is trying to deceive people, the truth matters more than my pride." Unknown to Ethan, Victoria had just entered the lobby, through a side entrance, and witnessed the entire conversation from several yards away. She watched him hand over the only clue he possessed without demanding compensation, revenge, or even an apology. In that silent moment, surrounded by polished marble floors and the soft echoes of a luxury hotel, Victoria finally understood the difference between a man seeking justice for himself and a man seeking what was right for everyone. And as Ethan quietly walked toward the exit without looking back, she realized that the greatest strength she had ever encountered was not power, influence, or wealth. It was a heart that refused to let kindness surrender, even after kindness had been rewarded with misunderstanding. The announcement came 3 days later inside the Grand Crest Hotel ballroom, where executives, department managers, reporters, and employees gathered beneath crystal chandeliers for an unexpected press conference. No one knew exactly why Victoria Hayes had requested every available staff member to attend, only that the event had been moved ahead of the merger presentation. A quiet murmur filled the room until Victoria stepped onto the stage. She stood with her usual confidence, yet there was something softer in her expression than anyone had ever seen before. Behind her, the large screen displayed a single sentence: "Truth deserves the whole story." The room fell silent. Victoria looked across the audience before speaking. Several weeks ago, an incident occurred inside this hotel that affected an innocent employee and damaged the reputation of people who did not deserve it. She paused, allowing every word to settle. After a complete independent investigation, we discovered that the maintenance assignment had been deliberately altered before it reached Ethan Walker. The misunderstanding was never his fault. A wave of surprise spread across the ballroom. Managers exchanged stunned glances. Employees who had quietly repeated rumors lowered their eyes. Victoria continued with calm honesty. Mr. Walker acted professionally before, during, and after the incident. Even after losing his position, he voluntarily returned valuable evidence that helped uncover the truth. He chose integrity when he had every reason to choose anger. The original security footage then appeared on the screen, this time complete from beginning to end. Everyone watched Ethan knock, announce himself, wait respectfully, enter only after receiving no answer, and immediately lower his eyes the instant he realized the mistake. No one spoke as the recording ended. The silence carried something entirely different now. It was not suspicion. It was respect. Victoria stepped away from the podium and looked toward the back of the ballroom, where Ethan had quietly accepted an invitation to attend, wearing his only navy blue suit that still fit after years of careful use. "Mr. Walker," she said gently, "would you please join me?" Every head turned as Ethan slowly walked down the center aisle. He looked almost uncomfortable with so many eyes following him, yet his posture remained calm and steady. When he reached the stage, Victoria faced him instead of the audience. "I owe you something far greater than an apology," she said. "I owe you the truth that should have been spoken the very first day." Without hesitation, she extended her hand. Ethan accepted it with quiet humility. The ballroom remained completely still. "On behalf of Hayes Global Holdings, the Grand Crest Hotel, and myself, I am sincerely sorry." No cameras flashed for several long seconds, because even the photographers seemed reluctant to interrupt the moment. Victoria then smiled gently. "If you're willing, I would like to offer you your position back immediately." Ethan looked at her kindly before answering. "Thank you. Your apology already means more than you know." He paused, choosing his words with the same care that had defined his character from the beginning. "As for the job, I will gladly return if it means helping people again." Warm applause slowly filled the ballroom, growing louder until every employee was standing. Yet Ethan never looked toward the crowd. His eyes searched only for one small face near the entrance where Lily stood beside Victoria's assistant, smiling with tears of quiet happiness. In that moment, Victoria realized that restoring one man's reputation had accomplished something even greater. It had reminded an entire room that dignity is never measured by titles, wealth, or power. It is measured by the choices a person continues to make when no one believes they deserve another chance. 6 months passed with the quiet confidence of seasons, keeping promises no one could rush. Ethan Walker returned to the Grand Crest Hotel, not because he had forgotten the painful misunderstanding, but because forgiveness had always weighed less than bitterness. His co-workers greeted him differently now. They no longer saw only the maintenance technician carrying a weathered toolbox through polished hallways. They saw a man whose character had remained steady when every reason to become resentful had stood before him. Guests continued to notice the same small acts of kindness that had always defined him. He paused to help an elderly couple with heavy luggage before anyone asked. He repaired a child's favorite toy while fixing a broken lamp in a family suite. He smiled at every employee, from the newest housekeeper to the senior executives, with the same quiet respect. Nothing about Ethan's heart had changed because recognition had finally arrived. Across the city, Victoria Hayes discovered that success felt different after learning humility. Board meetings still filled her calendar. Investors still demanded results. New acquisitions still required impossible decisions. Yet she found herself measuring achievement less by quarterly reports and more by the people whose lives her choices could quietly shape. She began visiting hotel employees without cameras or announcements, asking about their families, listening instead of speaking, remembering names instead of titles. One Saturday afternoon, she accepted an invitation to attend Lily's school choir performance. She sat quietly in the back row, unnoticed by most parents, applauding with genuine joy as Lily's clear voice joined dozens of others filling the auditorium with hope. After the concert ended, Lily ran toward her father before stopping in front of Victoria with a shy smile. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Victoria knelt until they were eye level. "Thank you for letting me hear you sing." Lily hesitated for a moment before asking the question only a child could ask with such honesty. Dad says people can make mistakes and still become friends. Is that really true? Victoria looked toward Ethan, who answered with a warm smile instead of words. She gently nodded. Yes. Sometimes the strongest friendships begin with the hardest lessons. Lily reached for both of their hands without thinking. They walked together across the school courtyard beneath tall oak trees, glowing with the colors of late autumn. There were no reporters, no executives, no headlines waiting to be written. Only three ordinary people discovering that healing often arrives quietly. Weeks later, Victoria invited Ethan to serve as director of guest experience for the entire hotel group, explaining that technical skills could be taught, but character could not. Ethan accepted only after one condition. Every employee, regardless of position, would receive the same respect and opportunity to be heard. Victoria smiled. That should have been our standard from the beginning. As evening settled over the city, they stood together on the rooftop terrace overlooking thousands of lights stretching toward the horizon. The breeze carried the familiar sounds of traffic, distant laughter, and life continuing exactly as it always had. Victoria looked at Ethan and spoke almost in a whisper. The day that door opened, I thought it was the worst moment either of us could experience. Ethan watched the sunset fade beyond the skyline before answering. Sometimes life opens the wrong door, so we can finally find the right path. Victoria smiled, not because every question had been answered, but because she finally understood what wealth had never been able to buy. Quiet dignity, grace freely given, second chances honestly earned. And somewhere below, as the city lights shimmered against the evening sky, the silence between them no longer carried misunderstanding. It carried respect, hope, and the gentle beginning of a future neither of them had ever expected to find.